Picture this. You're standing on the edge of nothing. Before you, a vast, bleached expanse of desert stretches to a horizon that shimmers with heat and forgotten promises. The sun is a merciless hammer in the sky, beating down on the cracked, salt-caked earth. In your hand is a piece of paper, a deed, brittle with age and mocking in its declaration. You have inherited this.
Asalt mine.
A gaping wound in the earth that hasn't yielded a single ounce of profit in 50 years. The lawyer's words echo in your mind, devoid of sympathy. Its estimated value, after outstanding taxes, is roughly $350, the price of a decent horse. The final, posthumous joke from a father you never knew. Every instinct screams at you to tear the paper to shreds, to let the pieces scatter on the wind like the dust of your own hopes. Turn your back on this monument to failure and ride away. Never look back. What would you do? Would you walk away from the last, pathetic piece of your legacy? Or would you stay, for just one night, to listen to what the silence has to say? Elias Thorne did not believe in listening to silence. Silence, to him, was the sound of loss. It was the empty space in a home where laughter used to be. It was the deafening quiet after a final, whispered goodbye. He had spent 5 years cultivating that silence, building walls around his heart so thick that no sound could ever penetrate them again. Yet, here he was, standing before the timbered mouth of the Thorne salt mine, the last testament to a man whose blood ran in his veins but whose face was a stranger's. The inheritance was an insult, a fitting end to a relationship that never began. His horse, Apollo, shifted restlessly behind him, sensing the tension in the air, the bitter taste of resignation. Elias crumpled the deed in his fist, the paper crackling in protest. He would go. He would sell the land for whatever he could get and erase this final, bitter chapter. But as the sun began its slow, magnificent descent, painting the sky in strokes of violent orange and bruised purple, something held him fast. It wasn't sentiment. He felt none for the man who had abandoned him and his mother. It was something else, a flicker of defiance. He would not be chased away by a ghost. He would spend one night in the dilapidated foreman's cabin that sagged near the mine's entrance. One night to claim the space, to stare into the abyss of his inheritance and prove it had no power over him. The cabin was a skeleton of a place, its ribs exposed to the wind. Dust lay thick as a shroud over everything. A broken table, a single chair, and a stone hearth were all that remained of a life once lived here. Elias built a small fire, the flames pushing back the encroaching shadows and the profound, soul-crushing loneliness of the desert at night. He sat before the hearth, the firelight carving deep lines into his face, illuminating the faint scar that traced a path from the corner of his eye to his jawline, a permanent reminder of a life he had failed to protect. As the world outside surrendered to the ink-black of the desert night, a sound, or the absence of one, pricked at his senses. He had expected the howl of the wind, the cry of a distant coyote. But beneath that there was something more, a low, rhythmic murmur, so faint it was almost indistinguishable from the whisper of the flames. He rose and stepped outside. The air was cold now, carrying a strange scent on its currents. It was not the dry, dusty smell of the desert. It was organic, faintly sweet, like crushed herbs, mixed with the damp, mineral tang of the deep earth. And there it was again, the sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, a human voice, impossibly soft, woven into a pattern of pleading, prayer. It was coming from the mine. Every rational thought told him it was a trick of the wind whistling through the tunnels. Every instinct that had kept him alive for 5 solitary years told him otherwise. He grabbed a lantern from his saddlebag, the flame casting a nervous, dancing light. He walked toward the gaping maw of the mine, the source of his resentment, now a place of unsettling mystery. The air grew colder as he stepped inside, the scent stronger. The prayer was clearer now, a fragile thread of sound in the immense, oppressive silence of the rock. It was a woman's voice. He followed it, his boots crunching on the salt-strewn floor. The main tunnel was a straight, dark passage, but the sound seemed to come from the very walls. He ran his hand along the rough-hewn rock, feeling for a draft, a break. His fingers brushed against a section of wall that felt different. Smoother. He pushed. With a low groan of protesting stone, a cleverly disguised section of the rock face gave way, revealing a dark, narrow opening. The scent of dried herbs and human warmth washed over him. He lifted the lantern, its light flooding the small, hidden chamber, and he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to steal the very air from the room. They were the color of a stormy sea, and they stared at him not as a man, but as a phantom, a new nightmare come to claim her. A small collection of dried herbs, a half-empty water skin, and a few stale crusts of bread were laid out beside her on a piece of cloth. This was her home. This secret pocket in the earth was her sanctuary. The prayer died on her lips, replaced by a choked, silent fear. Her name was Clara, though he would not learn that for some time. In that moment, she was simply a ghost in his father's mind, a silent prayer given form. And Elias Thorne, a man who had sworn off all human connection, felt the first crack appear in the fortress he had built around his heart. The worthless mine, the final insult, had just revealed a secret worth more than all the salt in the world. It held a life, and he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he could not walk away. The first days were a delicate dance of silence and space. Elias moved her from the cold damp of the mine into the relative comfort of the cabin. He cleaned away the years of dust and neglect, repaired the broken chair, and ensured the hearth was always filled with wood. He left food and water for her on the table and would retreat outside for hours, giving her the room to emerge from the shell of her fear. He worked on the cabin's dilapidated roof, the rhythmic sound of his hammer a steady, reassuring percussion against the vast desert quiet. He didn't ask her name, nor where she had come from. He understood that questions were a form of pressure, and she was as fragile as a desert flower after a long drought. He simply offered presence without expectation, a silent guardianship. Clara watched him from the cabin's single dirty window, her gaze a mixture of suspicion and a desperate, burgeoning hope. She saw the way he moved, with a quiet deliberation that spoke of a deep, contained sorrow. She saw the scar on his face and wondered at the story it told. She saw his hands, calloused and capable, as he mended things that were broken, and she wondered if he could mend a broken life, too. Slowly, she began to emerge. It started with a cup of water she left for him on the porch railing as he worked. Then, a small bundle of the desert herbs she had gathered, the same ones whose scent had led him to her, placed beside his bedroll. They were for healing, she would later explain. One evening, as he sat by the fire staring into the flames, a nightly ritual where he wrestled with the ghosts of his past, she spoke for the first time. "You have kind eyes," she said, her voice raspy from disuse, yet clear as a bell. Elias turned, startled. She stood in the doorway, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the firelight softening the harsh lines of fear on her face. He said nothing, only nodding his acknowledgement, but inside, her words landed like a restorative rain on the barren landscape of his soul. No one had called him kind in a very long time. Her story came out in pieces, fragments offered during the quiet twilight hours as they shared a simple meal. She had been an indentured servant in the nearby town of Redemption, a place ruled with an iron fist by a man named Mayor Thompson. He was a man who collected things: land, wealth, and people. Clara's parents had died, leaving behind a debt to Thompson that he claimed she was bound to work off. But it wasn't work he wanted. It was ownership. He saw her as another one of his possessions, and his intentions grew darker with each passing day. He was a pillar of the community on the outside, a corrupt, possessive monster on the inside. She had seen no way out but to flee, running into the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate prayer for deliverance. She had stumbled upon the abandoned mine, discovering the hidden chamber by accident, and had survived there for weeks, a ghost hiding in the earth. "I prayed for a miracle," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the fire. I did not expect it to be a man with a sad face and a hammer. Elias, in turn, found himself speaking of the things he had buried. He told her about his wife, Eleanor, and their young daughter, Lily. He spoke of a prairie fire, a freak accident that had moved with the speed of a demon, consuming his home, his family, his entire world in a single horrific afternoon. I wasn't there, he said, his voice thick with a guilt that had not faded with time. I was in town, buying seeds for a garden Lily wanted to plant. By the time I saw the smoke, it was too late. He had been running ever since, not from the law, but from the memory of the fire, from the silence they had left behind. The cabin, which had at first felt like a cage of his father's making, was slowly transforming. With Clara there, it was no longer just a shelter from the elements. The scent of her herbs mingled with the wood smoke. Her quiet presence filled the empty spaces. They fell into a comfortable rhythm. He would hunt and repair, securing their small sanctuary. She would gather herbs and edible plants, tending to the cabin with a care that turned it into a home. They were two broken people, finding solace in the shared quiet, their solitary lives intersecting in the most unlikely of places. The salt mine, a symbol of his bitter and worthless inheritance, had become their fortress. And in the heart of the desolate desert, under the vast, star-dusted sky, something fragile and beautiful began to grow. It was hope. The peace they had cultivated was as fragile as a desert bloom, and they both knew it. Redemption was only a day's ride away, and a man like Mayor Thompson was not the type to let a prized possession go missing without a search. The first sign of trouble came on the wind. Elias was returning from a hunt, a rabbit slung over his shoulder, when he saw the dust cloud on the horizon. It was too small for a sandstorm, too deliberate for a random gust. It was riders. He moved quickly, his body tensing with a familiar, cold dread. He stabled Apollo in a small, hidden ravine behind the mine and approached the cabin with caution. Clara was already at the window, her face pale, her hand pressed against the glass. "They're coming," she breathed, the words a wisp of smoke. He didn't have to ask who they were. Her terror was answer enough. He looked into her eyes, seeing the flicker of the hunted animal returning. "You will go back to the chamber in the mine," he said, his voice low and steady, a rock against the rising tide of her panic. "Bar it from the inside. Do not come out. No matter what you hear," she hesitated, her gaze torn between him and the approaching danger. "Elias," she began, her voice trembling. "Go," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He watched her slip away into the mine's dark mouth before turning to face the coming storm. There were 3 of them. They rode with an arrogant swagger, their horses kicking up dust as they reined in before the cabin. The man in the middle was portly and well-dressed, his suit a stark, dark gray against the bleached landscape. A silver star was pinned to his vest, but it gleamed with authority, not justice. This was Mayor Thompson. His face was a mask of false congeniality, but his eyes were small and hard, like chips of obsidian. They swept over the cabin, the neatly stacked firewood, the repaired roof, and finally, they landed on Elias. "Quite the homestead you've got here," Thompson said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "Didn't know the old Thorn place had a squatter." Elias remained silent, his hand resting casually on the hilt of the hunting knife at his belt. His stillness was more of a challenge than any words could have been. The men flanking the mayor were brutish and mean-faced, their hands hovering over the pistols on their hips. They were attack dogs, waiting for their master's command. "I'm not a squatter," Elias said, his voice even. "This land belongs to me." He held up the deed, which he now carried with him at all times. Thompson chuckled, a humorless sound. "A piece of paper. I have pieces of paper, too. Ones that say this entire region is under the jurisdiction of the town of Redemption. And I am Redemption." His eyes narrowed. "We're looking for something that belongs to me. A runaway. A girl named Clara. You seen her?" The lie came easily to Elias's lips, a necessary shield. "I've seen no one." I live alone. Thompson dismounted, his boots crunching on the salty earth as he walked toward Elias. He was shorter than Elias but carried an immense weight of self-importance. He circled him like a predator sizing up its prey. Funny, the mayor mused, his gaze drifting toward the mine entrance. My trackers followed a set of small footprints right to this area. They just vanished. Right around this hole in the ground, he stopped, his face inches from Elias's. I have a legal contract, an indenture. The girl is my property until her family's debt is paid. You're harboring stolen goods, friend. That's a crime. A storm was brewing on the horizon, the real kind, with dark, bruised clouds gathering in the west. It was a mirror to the storm standing right in front of him. Elias didn't flinch. She's a person, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Not property. A flicker of something dangerous ignited in Thompson's eyes. The mask of civility slipped. That's where you're wrong. In my town, I decide what people are. He gestured to the mine. My men are going to have a look inside your little cave there. And if we find her, well, there will be a price to pay. For both of you, the two thugs dismounted, their intentions clear. They started toward the mine. Elias moved to block their path, a silent, immovable object. The air crackled with tension. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, spattering against the dusty ground. I'm telling you for the last time, Elias said, his voice cold as the coming rain. There is no one here, and you are not welcome on my land. Thompson smiled, a chilling, predatory baring of teeth. Your land? He sneered. This worthless patch of salt? You think I care about this land? I am here for what is mine. He gave a sharp nod to his men. Get him out of the way. The confrontation he had dreaded was here. The sanctuary he had built was about to become a battlefield. And as the thugs drew their weapons, Elias knew that the silence he had once cherished was about to be broken by the sound of violence. The first man came at him fast, a lumbering brute who swung a fist like a sledgehammer. Elias sidestepped, the blow whistling past his ear. He moved with a fluid economy of motion born from a life of hardship, not wasting an ounce of energy. He brought the heel of his palm up under the man's chin, a sharp, jarring impact that sent him stumbling backward, his eyes wide with surprise. The second man was more cautious, pulling a long, wicked-looking knife. The steel flashed in the gloomy, storm-lit air. From the corner of his eye, Elias saw Mayor Thompson watching, a look of smug satisfaction on his face, as if this were all a spectator sport arranged for his amusement. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the salt-crusted ground into a slick, treacherous mud. The thug lunged, the knife arcing toward Elias's ribs. Elias parried the attack with his forearm, the blade slicing through his sleeve and leaving a burning line on his skin. He ignored the pain, using the man's momentum against him, twisting his arm and sending the knife spinning into the dirt. A sharp elbow to the man's temple sent him collapsing to his knees, dazed. But they were two to his one, and they were relentless. The first man had recovered, his face a mask of rage. He charged again, tackling Elias around the waist and driving him to the muddy ground. The air rushed from Elias's lungs as he hit the earth. He fought against the crushing weight, his muscles straining. He could hear Thompson's mocking laughter over the rising howl of the wind and the downpour. You see, the mayor shouted, his voice triumphant. This is how the world works. The strong take what they want. Suddenly, a shape emerged from the mouth of the mine. It was Clara. Her face was a storm of terror and fierce determination. In her hands, she held a heavy, rusted pickaxe she must have found deep in the tunnels. She had disobeyed him. She had come out. Leave him alone, she screamed, her voice cutting through the roar of the storm. The sight of her seemed to enrage Thompson. His face twisted into a snarl of pure possessiveness. There you are, my dear, he spat. Get her. The distraction was all Elias needed. As the dazed thug on his knees turned toward Clara, Elias exploded upward, throwing the man on top of him aside. He scrambled to his feet, mud-splattered and bleeding, and placed himself squarely between Clara and Thompson's men. He was a wall. He was a fortress. He would not let them pass. It was in that moment of desperate, defiant standoff that another sound cut through the chaos, the thunder of approaching hooves. Not 2 or 3 horses, but a dozen or more. A posse of riders crested the nearby ridge, their silhouettes stark against the stormy sky. At their lead was an old, grizzled man with a shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. It was Jedediah, the only man in Redemption who had shown Elias a sliver of kindness, an old prospector who had known his father. He had seen the mayor and his thugs ride out and had finally decided that enough was enough. He had rounded up the other townsfolk, the blacksmith, the ranchers, the storekeeps, who had long suffered under Thompson's thumb. They had found their courage. Thompson's face went from triumph to disbelief, then to pure panic. The power dynamic had shifted in an instant. His 2 hired muscles, seeing the armed, grim-faced townsfolk arrayed against them, lost all their fight. They backed away, their hands held up in surrender. Thompson, Jedediah's voice boomed, as powerful as the thunder overhead. Your reign in Redemption is over. We've found the real town ledgers. We know about the debts you forged, the land you stole. The mayor's face turned ashen. The legal manipulations, the foundation of his power, had crumbled. He was exposed, no longer a mayor but a common thief. He looked at Elias, at Clara, then at the posse of angry citizens. With a strangled cry of fury and defeat, he scrambled onto his horse and fled into the storm, a coward running from the justice he so richly deserved. The crisis was over. The rain began to soften, washing the mud and blood from the ground. Jedediah dismounted and walked toward Elias, his face etched with a gruff respect. Your father, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He wasn't a great businessman, but he was a good man. He always said this mine had a secret worth protecting. Looks like he was right. In the aftermath, the world felt new. The townsfolk of Redemption, freed from their oppressor, began to build a true community. They offered Elias and Clara their help, their friendship. The salt mine, once a symbol of isolation and failure, became the heart of a new beginning. They discovered that deeper veins in the mine held not just salt, but rare minerals, making the worthless inheritance incredibly valuable. But its true value was never in the rock. It was in the sanctuary it had provided, the family it had forged. Elias, the man who had walled off his heart, found himself the quiet center of a community. Clara, the woman who had lived in fear, found her voice, her strength, becoming a respected leader in her own right. The cabin was no longer a temporary shelter but a permanent home, filled with the warmth of the hearth and the sound of quiet, easy laughter. A found family had taken root in the unlikeliest of soil. What is the true measure of an inheritance? Is it counted in dollars and cents, in acres of land or veins of salt? Or is it found in the unexpected moments that force us to confront who we are and what we stand for? Elias was left a piece of worthless land, a final, bitter joke from a father he never knew. But in that desolation, he found a silent prayer. He found a life worth protecting. He found a reason to stop running from the ghosts of his past and build a future. He found a home. How many of us walk away from our own worthless salt mines? How often do we turn our backs on a challenge because it seems too difficult, or a person because they seem too broken? Sometimes the greatest treasures are not buried in the earth, but in the chambers of the human heart, waiting for someone with enough courage to listen to the silence, to follow the faintest prayer, and to push open the hidden door. If this story of redemption and courage resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Your stories and reflections are what build this community. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales that explore the strength of the human spirit.